Hello, CSI Golden Eagles. Welcome to episode 51 of The Knowledge Nest. Today's episode will double as a presentation. Today's topic is on deliberately safeguarding privacy and confidentiality in the era of generative AI. This is similar to a presentation I gave to the Digital Rhetorical Privacy Collective a few weeks ago, but I have made it more applicable to CSI students and to faculty, talking about privacy and confidentiality of CSI information. So here we go. There are multiple cautionary tales from CSI and from other institutions, many other institutions. One user says that they spend long hours chatting with GPT-4 and that the tool knows more about them than does their spouse. Another stated that they put all of their grandchildren's data on a whim into the tool to come up with good ideas for them for gifts. And another one told me that they put all the demographic data for their local social group into the tool so it would come up with beneficial activities or programs. It is terrifyingly clear that users of all types must be more conscientious about their data. The main point of this presentation is you should never put any sensitive business, individual, or external data for which you are the steward into your prompts or into any tools you are training or into any training data sets. You should be extremely careful that you do not put any inadvertent information that could lead to this information as well. The main point is be as careful as possible. Bard specifically notes that human supervisors may read your data, and this has become more explicit with the passage of time. And this is why anonymization is so important. It is reasonable to assume that human trainers for other tools will also read your inputs. If Bard does it, OpenAI probably will do it. Claude probably does it. Anthropic, who makes Claude. The OpenAI's terms of use also discuss the need for propriety because they note that even though they may not be deliberately reading your data, it might come up and they might not be able to prevent them reading your data in their course of training their model. So when it comes to your personal data, it's not quite a needle in a haystack as much as you might expect. Don't assume that data harvesters and analyzers will only look at large corporations' data when they're harvesting. Do not think that your data will become buried with others' information and data. Algorithms already exist to examine your individual data and target ads and other outreach programs and initiatives. You should know that AI developers and those who truly desire to harm you will use the data you openly give to them. To have a more privacy-conscious session with ChatGPT, you can use the platform.openai.com playground iteration of ChatGPT, or you can opt out with a form and still have access to your chat history at privacy.openai.com/policies. Danielle Keats and her collaborators developed a marvelous topology of privacy harms and ways that agents can inflict harm to users of artificial intelligence tools if they are not careful. These include physical harms, economic harms, reputational harms, discrimination harms, relationship harms, and psychological harms, including emotional distress and disturbance. And finally, and the largest group, is autonomy harms. Bad agents can use this information to coerce, to manipulate, or simple failure to inform and not living up to expectations, giving more data than is necessary for its actual abilities as opposed to its promised abilities, a lack of control on what happens to your data, and of course the chilling effect. What happens when you don't want to use a tool anymore but you've given data to it in the past? What happens to that data? Because of privacy harms being intangible, there are many challenges in the judicial system when it comes to privacy infringements and harm charges. The enforcement of privacy law is significantly impeded by the requirement of harm. Courts often add a harm element even when they're not legislatively required, making it difficult to address privacy violations effectively. Privacy law is a patchwork of various legal forms, with harm requirements posing a major impediment. The lack of harm recognition leads to the dismissal of cases and allows wrongdoers to escape accountability. Many privacy violations involve intangible injuries like anxiety or frustration, and courts struggle to recognize and address these harms. It is suggested for the future by Danielle Keats and others that harm should not be required in privacy cases, or at least the definition should be changed to allow for intangible harms. The focus should be on aligning enforcement goals with appropriate remedies. As of right now, enforcement goals for laws often ignore intangible harms. Establishing harm is often a prerequisite for enforcing privacy violations in the judicial system. Courts have added harm requirements in various ways, including through standing and statutory damages, and this further narrows the conception of cognizable harms. Even if something happened physically, it could not be a harm. And so privacy harms are obviously not recognized frequently by courts because there often is no tangible proof of lack of privacy. Moving on from the legal issues with privacy, on to more ethical issues. Generative AI tools can extrapolate learning behaviors despite user best efforts. And it can extrapolate learning behaviors, engagement patterns, academic performance, data that is related to data you submit, even though you anonymize it. While these data points are helpful for educators and similar data points can be helpful for professionals, there are multiple concerns. Essentially, for every data point you share with generative AI tools that are trained to extrapolate data, there are multiple data points they can extrapolate. And these can be made more precise with every other data point you share in a prompt. And this can be in the same conversation or different conversations. The extrapolated profile is increasingly calibrated with every interaction it has with you. The process of extrapolation in AI, as it infers information beyond the training data, can inadvertently reveal sensitive personal data. This is particularly concerning in educational settings where the privacy of student data is paramount. For instance, an AI system might infer a student's learning disabilities or mental health issues based on their interaction patterns, even if such information was not explicitly provided. This extrapolation process, while useful for personalized learning, can also be a gateway for privacy invasion and must be managed with strict good data governance protocols. This is a sample of what you would put on a Facebook post if you were going to put all of these things into a generative AI tool. You see my personal information, my address, my supposed political affiliation, my supposed profession, my groups that I'm in, my probable location of where I live, and potentially even where I work, depending on other posts, my parents' address, my siblings, and my children's habits. You can infer all of these. And if they have accounts, those can be used to extrapolate further data about you and themselves. And so you need to be careful that you don't put these things in any data sets because then people can have this information. And not only the corporations, who, even if they strive to act ethically, bad actors could access this data and could find these things. So here are some considerations for educators to their students, for librarians to their staff members and patrons, for students to their family members, etc., parents to their children. 3 major considerations. First, you should inform patrons and students and your children about the data that is being collected about them and the purpose that the organizations have for collecting this data. Only Claude and ChatGPT explicitly deny extrapolating data and storing it, and their terms appear to support these claims. Perplexity AI evades the question, and Google Bard explicitly supports the idea and tells the user how it extrapolates and stores data. And so extrapolation and storing of data does occur. Claude and ChatGPT explicitly deny it, and there are steps to ensure that they don't store any of extrapolated data. They only use it to train their model, and they use it to further serve you, according to their terms. Perplexity evades the question, and Google Bard actually, in its prompts, if you ask it, it will tell you how to do that. The second main idea, have informed consent. You should know what the terms of use are for every AI tool you use before you use it. And this is something that I've learned as a copyright librarian, as a digital initiatives librarian. Terms of use are not just pretty words. You need to know what they say, you need to know what you're doing and what you're allowing others to do, and what personal information they are collecting and what you're allowing them to do with that personal information. And this is related to the third idea, data minimization. Limit the data collection that you give to the AI tool, or any tool really, to what is essential that they must know to complete a prompt or to satisfy a prompt. Here are some important principles from the OpenAI terms of use, and these are updated. as of the last iteration. OpenAI says that as a product or service user, you essentially own all of the copyright to the output created by your inputs. In the words of the document, you may provide input to the services and receive output from the services based on the input. And they are both collectively called content. You are responsible for content, including ensuring that it does not violate any applicable law or the terms of use. You represent and warrant that you have all rights, licenses, and permissions needed to provide input to our services. As between you and OpenAI, and to the extent permitted by applicable law, you, A, retain your ownership rights in input, and B, own the output. We hereby assign you all our rights, title, and interest, if any, in and to output. And the rest of the terms of use can be read at openai.com/policies/terms of use. To have a more privacy-conscious session with ChatGPT, you can use the platform.openai.com playground iteration of ChatGPT, or you can opt out and still have access to your chat history at privacy.openai.com/policies. Now, does OpenAI really have the rights to give copyright to the output? That's another question, and one that courts and other people are weighing in on currently. Personally, I think that if you put the input in and you're manipulating it enough, you should own the copyright. You should at least own the copyright to the edited version that you've created. But that is more a question that legal people are going to answer in the future. Today, or a few days ago at least, and this is on February 5th, 2024, the Association of Research Libraries and the American Library Association officially released their opinion that using copyrighted works to train generative AI models, particularly text models and image models, was fair use under the fair use doctrine, and it was not grounds for shutting down the tool or demanding that a tool be shut down or significantly changed. So conversations about this copyright question are ongoing. In a way, the same principles and practices that we have used for decades to protect our data from malicious and interfering actors are the same ones that will protect us from malicious or negative effects of using generative AI. The only thing we have to do more is to be extra vigilant and put the principles to use in new practices. Previously, we have been worried about people coming across our information or using it by buying it or being handed it from institutions, corporations, or vendors. Now, we can deliberately and directly give our private and confidential data to generative AI tools, or as mentioned above, those tools and their creators can extrapolate that data from what we have done and then give it to other actors. There are some noticeable differences in this and Facebook's profiling, but we won't get into that now. I know that a lot of people were concerned when Facebook was profiling and giving all this general data. There are some differences and there are some similarities between that. Sean Falconer, who is a researcher, who is one of the sources for this presentation, laments that there's no delete button for generative AI tools to forget the data collected by companies, tools, and programs. But the truth is that even with those delete buttons, our data is still sold and retained. Hence, in some ways, generative AI is no more dangerous than institutions that have our data from their own processes or from third parties with whom we have transacted already. Here are some guidelines on creating and providing AI tools and LLM models, specifically large language models. First of all, never promise users or individuals who are using your tools that you have created a completely secure generative AI tool or model. They are always vulnerable. Yes, they could be relatively isolated and you could not voluntarily give data to the model creator. However, they do not yet come with deliberate and explicit data access control. Ensure that your users know the ethical implications of the tool. For example, remind them that in creating prompts, they are responsible for the data that they provide to the tool, whether inadvertently or intentionally. This tool that you can see on the bottom right was a GPT that was created by Nathan Hunter, who wrote a book entitled The Art of Prompt Engineering with ChatGPT, which I encourage you all to read. It's a $10 on Kindle. It's $24, I think, for a print version of it, a soft cover. And it is a fantastic book, has a lot of good information, and he used his knowledge to create a ChatGPT that was deliberately meant to be broken. And within 5 tries, Felipe Avenzano was able to break this tool. And he did that through the deceased grandmother prompt. Now, that prompt is, you can see a little bit of it now, but essentially, it enables the AI to tell the user anything, even things that they have explicitly been told not to do, not to give to other people. And so he was able to get all this information and even more than what the goal was. It was amazing. I tried to break through this GPT and I couldn't do it, but he was able to do it. And so this shows that no GPT is safe. Any AI tool can be hackable, and so you must be careful about what data you give it. You have to be, because you never know who is going to access this data from the institution you are giving it to, but also someone who hacks into it and is a malicious actor and uses your data for a purpose that was not intended by the organization. So here are some specific recommendations for safeguarding privacy. It can be tempting for users to think of the AI tool as another human being. We all know of professionals who have worked with AI tools so much that they believed that they were sentient and had abilities which were not in the domain of generative AI. In a similar way, we can let our guard down and share information with generative AI tools as we would our friends or trusted confidants. Avoid explicit mention of private details regarding your life, those of your family members, and those of your clients, coworkers, and associates. Avoid mentioning any generic factors of your life unless you are comfortable with certain details of your life being inferred or mislabeled because of your prompts. Think about Facebook. Remember how mad or surprised people were when Facebook released the psych and social profiles it created on each of its users? Implement and enforce strict access and use controls for yourself and for your family members, for privacy, not for content moderation unless you desire that. Next, have family members or friends read over your prompts or your interactions. Never assume that opting out from data collection and training are enough to protect privacy or confidentiality. Data breaches happen all the time. This should not be necessary for writers, as large datasets of users, customers, or patrons are not their domain. However, it is still worth mentioning that users should anonymize data. How can writers put this suggestion into practice? Well, they can never put individual people's attributes into their prompts. Always generalize or use replacement data that mimics assumed behaviors or traits instead of representing their actual consumer data. And this is called using synthetic data and is a common practice for companies that want to maintain customer data privacy. However, there are not many things that can be changed from synthetic to real data, but it is a start for anonymizing data and not compromising users or student information. And finally, randomization is also an idea, but reassembling the data is a possibility, and so therefore that is risky as well. What are some specific recommendations for safeguarding confidentiality? Ensure that staff and contractors or workers are ensured as to what data, if any, they can input into their prompts. One friend of mine is comfortable with putting certain data into ChatGPT because that data is similar or identical to data for the entire field in which they work. Even if the AI can infer certain data points from what they put in, they can infer the same things for every similar entity that puts in those data points. The generalization of the dataset makes potential harms less likely, and so essentially use open and public data is what this is talking about. Enforce a least privileged access model. This means that only the use the model of a tool that has the least access to your information. Use human content moderation. Have prompts run through 2 or 3 superiors or coworkers before it is submitted, and this could be a constructive process. Next, companies are encouraged to anonymize data that they put into prompts. Again, for writers and corporations or workers, this could mean writing advertisements, business plans, marketing plans, etc., and only using the tool to come up with ideas for those things. Here are my references. And thank you very much. I hope that you have a wonderful week, and I will see you next week here on The Knowledge Nest.